welcome to episode 311 of Late Night Linux. I'm Joe, and with me are Phelim.
Evening.
Graham.
Hello.
And Will.
Hello.
We haven't done Voice of the Masses for a while, so let's do that now. The question we posed was, do you dual boot and why? And we got a shitload of responses to this. Quite a few people said that they used to but don't now. And some people mentioned borrowing Windows machines from family when needed. And what was interesting was that it was almost like the assumption was Linux and Windows was the only viable dual boot. So what about you lot? Phelim, you clearly do not dual boot.
I do not.
You're just KDE Neon and that's it.
I have a Windows VM for development for building stuff for Windows, but that's about it.
Yeah, which a lot of other people said, having a VM. But what about the other two of you?
I don't dual boot at all now. I've got my work laptop, which is all Linux all the time, and I've got my game machine, which I just boot into Windows now. I've kind of lost interest in booting into Linux and seeing if games work. It's just easier for me to use Windows, so that's what I've been doing.
Boo!
Because you did buy an extra SSD, didn't you, for Linux game testing, but that didn't work out then.
It worked out like the disk is still in there and Linux is still installed on it, but I couldn't tell you the last time I booted into it, probably a year ago or something like that. I just haven't had the need to go in there, and Epic Games still don't run on Linux. And in fact, they've said that if you try to, they're going to ban you, and I could do without that. So it's Windows for games and Linux for business.
I do still dual boot, and it's always been a really important part of, I guess, keeping everything running. For a long time, it was a ridiculous situation where I'd have Windows 10, I'd have Hackintosh booting from Grub to Refined, and then I would have Ubuntu, which I do have installed natively, and then Arch, which was my kind of default environment, but I still keep Ubuntu natively installed so that I can check things.
That was when you were a poor magazine editor and couldn't afford a proper Mac.
Yeah, that's right.
You did all your publishing work on a Hackintosh?
No, I'd used it for music.
Oh, dear God, okay.
I purposefully built a PC with something that would be recognized as a Lightning USB-C for my audio interface. And before that, it was Firewire. I kept that running for years. These days, I don't have the Hackintosh, but I still have Arch, Ubuntu, and Windows. I rarely boot into Windows. It's there for gaming and my VR stuff. And when I do, every couple of months, it pisses me off because there's always some critical update. So often I'll boot into it to check something quickly. And of course, when you check something quickly in Windows every 2 months, it means it's actually going to spend another 12 hours turning the machine off because it's installing critical updates. I hate it. But yeah, it's still important. And it's still a good thing to be able to have two distributions installed side by side.
Yeah, for me, it depends on the machine. Like this recording machine is just Linux because that's all I'm doing with it. But some other machines that I do music stuff on and whatnot, I have Windows on there. But as I've said many times, I don't connect that to the network. It's like just siloed just for making music and whatnot. And then some laptops, I have a Windows partition just in case, but other ones I don't. But I do tend to multi-boot various Linux distros on laptops that I'm kind of testing stuff out on and want to have various versions of Ubuntu and whatnot. So, yeah, I kind of do and I don't, I suppose. It depends on the machine is the answer. It was interesting that not many people talked about dual booting different Linux setups. Ada said, I used to dual boot multiple Linux setups when distro hopping, would not do it again though, too risky. And only one person talked about dual booting macOS and Asahi, and that was Popey. He said, I keep macOS so I can continue to get updates to firmware, and if I need to use it for something that doesn't work on Asahi, for example, HDMI out. And I suppose technically my M1 MacBook Air dual boots as well, although I haven't used that for either recently for some reason.
Wouldn't it be amazing if Apple joined FUPD?
Can you imagine it?
It's not going to happen, but yeah.
I do think that FUPD is the reason why a lot of people wouldn't necessarily dual boot anymore, because you can, if you've got a ThinkPad, for example, you can update the BIOS straight in Linux. No need to fuck around with Windows.
I'd say a lot of the UEFI stuff, though, you can do that sort of A/B sort of thing inside it these days, even though it's awful. And I don't care if my fans are animated. Stop doing that. But anyway, yeah, I know. But I think it would be lovely. I don't have a single machine that is supported by FUPD, unfortunately.
Well, Keen said, no, I do keep a Windows VM around for updating firmware of various USB devices. But Chris said, it's always there on nearly all but my smallest disk machines. But I rarely boot into it. There will always be some piece of crap that refuses to work in a VM, even with USB pass-through, etc. So having it around can be handy sometimes. At home, it gets the guest Wi-Fi only VLAN off from any real fun on my main subnet. Very wise.
I don't know why these people don't trust Microsoft. That's terrible. They heart Linux.
Weird, isn't it? But a shitload of people talked about games. And, I talked to Jason about the rosy state of Linux gaming, mostly thanks to the Steam Deck. And it is in a good state, but there are still those few that need Windows, which is a shame. And, like you've said, Will, you just can't be asked with, is it going to work? Is it not going to work? How well is it going to work? In Windows, apart from all the bullshit that goes with having to run Windows, the games will work 100%.
It's about not wishing to invest the energy into making it work just right on Linux. I just want to play a game. I don't want to be also a sysadmin, And so that level of effort is, in my opinion, is easier. And if you've got to boot into Windows to play Fortnite, let's say, then why would you choose to boot an entirely different operating system to play a different game? I just don't want to do that. I can't be bothered. So it's just laziness, I think.
Well, and there also must be a sense of Linux for work and Windows for play. I mean, you actually said that, didn't you? It's a way for you to switch off completely. You're in Windows. You're not going to be doing anything even remotely related to work, are you? You're just playing games in that.
Yeah, pretty much. I mean, normally there's a browser open with Gmail up or Lobsters or something. So there's always a little bit of reading going on in between gaming. But there isn't Slack. There is GitHub Desktop on there for some reason, but there isn't Slack and there isn't work email and all that kind of thing. So, yeah, I suppose it is a way to try and separate the two worlds. I don't think that's my primary reason to do it that way. I think it's just I know that games work.
What about the hardware hacking stuff that you do? Do you ever need Windows for that? Presumably not.
That's a good question. There are some devices that you need to flash that only have a Windows client, but I have never had to use one of those. I was trying to flash a 5 gigahertz radar device the other day, which had it's like a presence sense.
Hang on, come back to that. What the fuck?
All right. So like PIR sensors, like movement sensors, right? They've been around for a long time. They use very little battery power. They're pretty reliable, but they require constant movement, or at least movement every so often, in order to stay in there is a person here mode. With a radar sensor, you can be stationary in the room and it can still know that you're there. And there are 24 gigahertz ones and 5 gigahertz ones. And it's effectively millimeter wave radar like they have in airport scanners, but way low power.
24 gigahertz?
Yeah. You can pick them up for peanuts. Like they're pretty cheap. But they're also not very good. There are a lot of them are built on open source reference designs, and they haven't really got the software quite right. So people have put together their own firmware for it. And in order to flash it, you can't just plug it into a USB stick. You have to put a debugger on it. And in order to put a debugger on it, sometimes the drivers for those only exist in Windows. And I had potentially to do this the other day. I guess I'm getting faded out now. However, I didn't have to do that in the end, because at some point in the last few years, I've bought a standard USB like J-Link debugger, and just so happens that there's a Python script which worked perfectly with that on Linux. So I didn't have to run Windows to flash that device.
Can you use the 24 gigahertz ones to warm up your leftovers?
I think they're milliwatts of power, so it might take a while.
All right.
So it's nothing to do with ICBM, so that's okay. I just was checking.
Well, Nameless says, I never did. And looking back, I would say that was the push that made me quickly adapt to Linux since there was no turning back.
I did the same.
Of course you did.
I dual booted in 97 and then stopped soon after because it was quite tricky. No internet or very little internet, trying to figure out how the hell to do things without trashing the shite out of machines. And eventually I ended up moving to Glasgow as part of work and all that. And yeah, I had one laptop with a 20 gig hard drive, so I wasn't really going to be dual booting on that thing. So I installed Linux and just went for it. And then I learned how to compile a kernel because I had to try and watch a DVD from Blockbusters without stuttering. And yeah, that was painful. Thanks, Susa.
Well, Curran said, I've recently set up a quadruple boot on my laptop. Linux, FreeBSD, NetBSD, and OpenBSD.
Mm-hmm.
Why? Because I wanted to see whether it was possible and to fill a void created by a lack of BSD in my life. I find Linux to be a bit boring these days and opaque. And I thought that was going to be the winner of the hipster stakes, but no, Jules comes along and says, I now dual boot Linux and Haiku on a desktop and have Haiku on an external drive for the laptop, since sometimes I want to use all the cores for compiling, and Haiku just feels so much better on bare metal.
Oh, well, I installed Linux on a wax cylinder, so what are you going to do about that?
We haven't had any mentions of Nix. Maybe you can't dual boot that. Why would you, if you've got the perfect operating system?
Well, Maziu said university exams, software such as Lockdown Browser and Safe Exam Browser only run in Mac and Windows.
What?
I've never heard of such things.
What the hell is that? Lockdown Browser? Is that where you teleports you back to 2020 and you get to relive fucking COVID?
I'm surprised they didn't call it Safety Browser.
Well, what I think this is about is where you have to do online exams and they demand that you use Windows and this browser, and you have to use a laptop, and you have to point the camera around the room to make sure you're not cheating and all the rest of it. And you just can't do that in Linux.
You're joking me.
I mean, I wouldn't take such an exam, but some people have to.
Have they heard of keying software? Yeah. Look, I'm moving around here. I am on the Starship Enterprise. Come on.
Okay, this episode is sponsored by ServerMania. Go to servermania.com/LNL to get 15% off dedicated servers recurring for life. ServerMania is a Canadian company with over a decade of experience building high-performance infrastructure hosting platforms for businesses globally. ServerMania has up to 20 gigabits per second network speeds in 8 locations worldwide for optimized global reach. They have flexible custom server configurations tailored to unique needs, as well as a personal account manager offering free consultations. With 24/7 live chat support and support ticket response times under 15 minutes, you can always keep your systems running smoothly. Alan Jude from 2.5 Admins has been a happy ServerMania customer for over 7 years, so support the show and join him at a hosting provider that truly delivers. Get 15% off dedicated servers recurring for life at servermania.com/LNL and use code LateNightLinux. That's servermania.com/LNL and code LateNightLinux. Let's do some feedback then. Patrick writes, I was listening to episode 299 where you discussed the digital signal processing course. I also lack the self-discipline to get through something like this on my own.
I never said that about myself. I said I was very disciplined. I just choose not to be.
Yeah, okay. But if I could be part of a small group all studying together, my chances of getting through would increase. I believe this is true of many people. Do you know of a way to organize groups like this? It's a good question. And I think that you'd have to kind of be part of a community to do that. So you'd have to go to latenightlinux.com/community and you'll see links to the Telegram, Matrix, and Discord and IRC, and just try and get other people involved. Someone needs to organize it. And Patrick, it sounds like you've volunteered.
Your first mistake.
I have a feeling that somebody has an open source project to help people organize themselves around a learning objective, but I can't for the life of me remember what it's called. I think it was Michael Hall that set this up, so I'm going to go and see if I can find that now.
I get the feeling that Michael Hall had a course that he had to do and instead wrote a project to study and organize people to study and not actually do the study himself. I'm not speaking from experience here at all.
That is genius, Philip. You're right.
But I do think that, yeah, join the Telegram or the Matrix or wherever it is and just see if there's other people there who are up for it. Or if people think this is a good idea, then you could always write to us, show@latenightlinux.com, and we can maybe put you in touch with Patrick and we can organize it that way. But I feel like just say, Patrick, it's your responsibility. Pick whichever of the chat platforms we have and you organize it.
I think there's an abundance of remote collaboration tools that are all accessible for free. Not all of them are free, properly free, but things like Google Hangouts or whatever it's called these days, where you can, without installing additional software other than a browser, share your screen and share video and sound and, communicate with each other over a live link. There must be hundreds and hundreds of tools out there already that would allow you to get together with a group of like-minded individuals and work on a common goal.
Or like in Linux Dev Time, Amal was talking about how he actually works with some of the people in his sort of remote setup, and they kind of just log into a call together and just sit there all day sort of thing. It's an interesting idea. I don't know if I could manage it. I'd probably be picking my nose without realising it beforehand, but yeah.
Ron writes, in episode 306, the conversation went something like, Joe says, they're obviously good at paying Torvalds, aren't they? And then Phelim said, I don't know, does he get paid much? Well, in the fiscal year ending December 2022, Torvalds was paid $700,331 plus just over $1 million.
So a third of a Mozilla CEO? Wow, that's poor.
So yes, they're very good at paying Torvalds and themselves. And then we've got a link to ProPublica.org breakdown of it all. So yeah, he gets paid shitloads, and fucking right, quite frankly.
Shitloads for doing shitloads, though. That's the thing. That's the key difference there.
Yeah, managing the most important open source project in the world. He deserves it. He fucking came up with it in the first place, didn't he? Fair play to him.
Oh, and he could have so much more.
Oh, he could have had.
Yeah.
Brian writes, I know some of the hosts use Tailscale and that they are a sponsor of yours. I wanted to let you know that I've created an applet for the new Cosmic desktop environment and a regular application that wraps the CLI in a GUI interface. It's early days, but works for basic functionality very well. I'm still working on it, but wanted to give you guys something that I found quite useful, even though it's basic. And then he links to the applet and the application.
Nice. And I just thought, I feel I should mention this for him. It's written in Rust.
Right, well, it's obviously really good then.
I think it's a good idea, though. It's a nice way to get people using things like that again. So it's cool.
Yeah, well, I'll put links in the show notes. Let's do a quick discovery. Graham, Terrain, a wave terrain synthesizer.
Yeah, apologies in advance for this. It is a software synthesizer. It's open source and it's Linux and it's Clap. We talked about this a while ago, the new plugin standard. But it's really good. I'm actually running it right now in Bitwig. But before I make a sound that will sound underwhelming and, well, what's the point? This Terrain synthesizer is really unique. I've never seen anything like it. A sound in a synthesizer is created from an oscillator, which is at its simplest like a sawtooth waveform or a sine waveform. The waveforms for Terrain are generated from a 3D terrain map, which could be a load of sine waves. If you imagine like a 3D OpenGL landscape, and you can see that within the synthesizer itself, and then the sound is generated by a point that moves across that landscape in kind of a repeating trajectory.
Well, I'm just looking at the screenshot, and it looks like an acoustic panel.
Yeah, and in fact, I would say a lot of this feels like physical modeling. It sounds like a kind of pipe physical modeling, because you can change where it is in the 3D landscape, where this kind of, I don't know, the cursor, I suppose, moves across it. You can change its speed and what it calls meanderance, which is how far it kind of moves away. This is what it sounds like a little bit. Which is a bit like frequency modulation synthesis, because we're dealing in sound waves. But if you change the terrain type, I'm going to have to try and do this in real time because I've got it running, and then change the kind of position that the cursor moves across. why. It's really interesting, and the fact that somebody's created this as an open source project, it's completely unique. I've never seen anything like this. It's a bit like a wavetable synthesizer, but with a wavetable synthesizer, you load up kind of preset values for this terrain, and you can just move backwards and forwards or up and down across them. This allows you to change the terrain in real time and also change the cursor position as it moves across the terrain. And it includes usual synth stuff like a filter and an envelope, but it's really, really interesting at the cutting edge of kind of synth design, and I love it.
Okay, this is a question that's going to lose a lot of people, but can you plug in LFOs and stuff to control the movement across the terrain?
That is a great question, and not within the synth itself. But all of its parameters can be controlled externally. So with an application like Bitwig or something else, you can create an LFO external to the synth and use that to modulate the parameters within the synth.
And my next question is, could you run 2 instances of it and output somehow the terrain LFO equivalent back into it?
Ooh. So it doesn't output control signals.
Right.
It's only audio output for what's generated from the terrain. So yeah, you could interpret the frequencies of those, but not the kind of the data that I think you're looking for.
Yeah, you can't get control voltage out of it, essentially.
No, that's
right?
that's a good question.
But it's open source, so someone could add that.
Yeah, and it's brand new, so it's only just arrived basically. So it's very much a first iteration. There's no polyphonic aftertouch, for example. You can't add aftertouch and modulate some of those parameters. Although it does support MTS ESP, which I think I've talked about before, the open source micro tuning protocol and framework that allows you to create different scales. It already includes that, which is perfect for this kind of sound.
So just to translate my original question about the LFOs, essentially I was asking, can you make it go womp, womp, womp?
I was going to say, can you feed in KML files and use actual terrain data in it?
Oh,
how meta would that be?
That's a really good question, yeah. Do you remember digital elevation maps that you used to get in Vista and other things? That would be very cool. You could use like Mars topography as the input.
So
that
cool.
would be very cool. I think that's an awesome feature request.
It would bring a whole new level to, who's the fella, the classical music player who does all the planets?
Gustav Holst.
Ah, okay, there you go. So you could actually have terrain data of the planets themselves.
It's great.
Okay, this episode is sponsored by Tailscale. Go to tailscale.com/LNL. Tailscale is the easiest way to connect devices and services to each other, wherever they are. Everyone these days has a VPN as a sponsor, but Tailscale isn't like those. This isn't about hiding your browsing habits from coffee shop owners, and it's not about watching Netflix in another country. Tailscale is a proper VPN for connecting your devices securely. It's great for companies, and it's great for self-hosters. Tailscale runs on all the major platforms and is based on WireGuard. It's really easy to set up without opening ports, thanks to NAT traversal. That's one of the reasons loads of the Late Night Linux family hosts use Tailscale. Tailscale lets you give apps, IDEs, subnet routers, and other nodes in your tailnet secure access to any other resource in your network without exposing that resource to the public. Site-to-site networking lets DevOps connect the infrastructure their team relies on to securely transfer data between resources such as web applications and databases. Tailscale's personal plan will always be free, so support the show and try Tailscale out for free today. You'll get up to 100 devices and 3 users for free at tailscale.com/LNL with no credit card required. That's tailscale.com/LNL. On to a bit of admin then. First of all, thank you everyone who supports us with PayPal and Patreon. We really do appreciate that. If you want to join those people, you can go to latenightlinux.com/support. And remember that for various amounts on Patreon, you can get an advert-free RSS feed of either just this show or all the shows in the Late Night Linux family. And you even get some episodes early. And if you want to get in contact, you can email show@latenightlinux.com. I'm now joined by Danielle Foré. Welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks for having me on.
So as promised from last week, you're here to talk about the release of Elementary OS 8. First of all, congratulations on it.
Thank you.
So in the very long blog post about this, at the beginning of it, you kind of break it down into 3 key things that you're focused on. So let's go through those. The first one, creating a new secure session that ensures applications respect your privacy and require your consent. What's all that about then?
The kind of big idea with that is we've been working on the new Wayland powered session, which we're calling the secure session. And Wayland kind of completes our trust relationship story where we have portals, we have Flatpak, and now we have Wayland. So the apps can be a lot more tightly sandboxed, and they're not able to kind of get around through the display server to do things like grab your keystrokes or see the pixels on your screen. So it really tightens up our privacy, security, and consent story.
But that Wayland session is not default yet.
That's right. We're sticking with the classic session by default for now because some apps still aren't ready yet to work in the sandbox world of the secure session. And we're also still waiting for some accessibility tools to catch up and things like that. So we have the secure session available for people that are ready to dive into it, but we're still shipping the classic X11 session by default for now.
Yeah, that makes sense. Is the goal kind of for maybe OS 9 for Wayland by default?
I think it really depends on a few different things upstream. We're kind of seeing what happens with, there's a new accessibility stack that's under development. Another big thing that would have to happen would be a replacement for the on-screen keyboard. So there's a couple of really big pieces that we'd need to be able to make Wayland the default, but that's definitely our goal. And we're hoping that we can get there and have a really complete session and move on from X11 sooner than later.
Yeah, it's about time, isn't it?
Yeah.
And what about this brand new dock then?
Yeah, so as part of our work on the new secure session, we kind of had to rewrite a lot of components. And one of the big ones that we had to rewrite was the dock because it was using all of these kind of X11 based internals. So in planning for that, we ended up doing a survey a few years ago where we kind of asked people that were using all different operating systems how they multitask on those operating systems. And that informed some of our decisions when we were rewriting the dock because we wanted to know like if the direction that we had already was good or if we needed to do something radically different. And it turned out that we have a lot of our design decisions validated by that survey. So the new dock is pretty similar to the old one, but we did get to add some new features to it and change a couple behaviors. One of the things that's kind of more eye-catching and exciting is when you have multiple windows open and you click one of the items in the dock, it'll do a nice little window spread. And we also were able to use some new free desktop standards to make launching multi-window apps more reliable. So there's kind of more little nice creature comforts. There's a lot of things that are in there that are based upon the feedback that we received, but it's mostly still pretty familiar and it works in the secure session.
And pressing the super key is different now, right?
Right. It used to be that when you press the super key, we popped up a shortcuts window that showed all the system shortcuts. And a lot of people asked for that to open the applications menu directly, which is pretty consistent with a lot of the way other platforms are working these days. So we went ahead and changed that default. You could still go into system settings if you want and make that open the multitasking view or show the shortcuts dialog like it used to. So that's all totally customizable. But the default now is to open the applications menu.
And this third point at the beginning of your blog post, empowering our diverse community through inclusive design, that has confused a lot of people, right? People seem to think that it's just about accessibility features, but it's about way more than that.
Yeah, so when we're talking about inclusive design, it's a methodology that not only includes looking at things like disability, but it also tries to identify other ways that we exclude people when we're designing technology. So specifically, we're looking at things like localization. We're looking at things like technical ability. We're looking at things like making sure that dark mode is really good because, not everybody uses their computer during the daytime or in a bright room. So we're trying to identify more axis of exclusion than just whether or not you're able-bodied, but anything else that could prevent people from, getting on with the things that they need to do.
But the accessibility side of things has been a focus for the last couple of releases, right?
Absolutely. And especially in this release, I feel really proud of the work that the team has done. We sat down with someone who was completely blind over the summer, and They walked us through a lot of the problems that they were having during, especially like our installation and initial setup process. So we went through and we completely rewrote a lot of the keyboard navigation and the screen reader support. And we added a screen reader support or improved it in a bunch of different areas where we hadn't previously looked. So definitely, if you have vision disabilities, this really should be way better for you. And we also introduced a new setting to show scroll bars all the time, because some people, gave us feedback about that the overlaid scroll bars were kind of hard for them to use. So we make sure that we have a couple of those things there for motor and vision disabilities as well.
System updates and drivers have changed, right?
Yeah, we used to have both system updates and drivers all kind of crammed into App Center. And we had this idea of like everything just being updates all in one place. But it turns out that actually was really confusing. Trying to present drivers as sort of an update didn't really work when you have like an NVIDIA driver with a bunch of different options and people need to select whichever option's appropriate for them. And there isn't necessarily a most up-to-date one. And we also found out that it was really confusing for people because when we have system updates and we have application updates, one of these things happens offline, which is system updates, and one of these things happens online, which is the app updates. So we separate that out into its own completely new process. And so it actually makes the architecture a lot better. It makes everything a lot faster, and it makes it a lot easier to understand. And we actually can provide automatic system updates now as well.
And the system settings app has been completely redesigned then?
Yeah, we got a lot of feedback about the design of system settings and that people wanted to see something a little bit more modern, especially compared to, some of the other platforms that are coming out with new designs for system settings. So we revisited that and we tried to make it a lot more consistent and use really modern design patterns. And so we have this great like dual pane look now that is, I think, a lot more aesthetically pleasing, but also a lot more easy to navigate in some ways. And we've added new settings and added tons of description text and reworked some things that were a little bit more confusing, and search is better. So it's overall like a way better app now.
And as ever, you've gone for a very kind of coherent design across the whole of the operating system.
That's definitely a major goal for us, is making sure that things are consistent and coherent. And we're trying to, even in periods of transition between design patterns, make sure that we're still doing a lot of callbacks to having these consistent design patterns so that when you're in one part of the UI and you see something and you learn it, you can take that knowledge to a different part of the UI and you're not having to relearn the parts of the system over and over again.
Well, thanks a lot for coming on and telling us all about this. If people want to give this release a go, then they should go to elementary.io, right?
Yeah, we have a pay what you can download at our website. And we also ship Elementary OS on a few different computers. So there's laptops, desktops, and even a new tablet to check out.
Right, well, I'll put a link in the show notes. Again, congrats on the release and hopefully talk to you again sometime.
Thank you so much for having me on.
Right, well, we'd better get out of here then. We'll be back next week when it'll probably be news and stuff. But until then, I've been Joe.
I've been Phelan.
I've been Graham.
And I've been Will.
See you later.